Usually when we look out at the world, there is this underlying expectation of, well, of obviousness, a sense that
Yeah.
cause and effect are visible, tangible things we can just, point to.
Right. We like things we can see.
Exactly. Like, think about building a house. You walk by a construction site, you see the pallets of bricks, you smell the mortar, you hear the nail guns going off, you watch the carpenters sweating in the sun, and you just point and say, there is a house being built by people.
It's comforting, honestly. I mean, we are sensory creatures. We rely on that steady stream of input, sight, sound, touch to feel secure in our reality. The bricks are there, the builders are there, the house is there. There's no mystery to it.
Right. Brick by brick, it is incredibly clean.
Yeah.
We like things to be strictly categorized by our five senses. But then you step into the world of classical philosophy and theology, and suddenly you aren't looking at a construction site down the street.
No, you definitely are not.
You're looking for the builder of the universe itself and that physical blueprint. To a lot of modern minds, it feels murky. It's like when we try to scale up our everyday logic to encompass the cosmos, it often feels like the tools we use to understand a house are they're totally inadequate for understanding existence itself.
Which is exactly why the material we are diving into today is so vital. I mean, it's the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters when you try to apply simple sensory tools to the infinite. You have to change the way you think, fundamentally.
And that is exactly what we are going to do today. Welcome to Reform Thinking. We are taking a deep dive into an incredibly profound, dense, and frankly majestic stack of notes.
It's quite the stack, yeah?
It really is.
Yeah.
We are pulling directly from Charles Hodge's systematic theology, specifically focusing on his extensive chapters on theism. And our goal today is to take these classical theological and philosophical arguments for the existence of an extramundane, personal God and, well, distill them.
Make them accessible.
Right. We want to extract the clear, memorable, and deeply fascinating insights buried in this 19th century masterwork and give you a framework that takes the murky and makes it brilliant.
Because we aren't just looking at the what of these classical arguments.
Yeah.
We are digging into the why and the how, like why they mattered then, how they work logically, and why they might completely alter your understanding of the universe today.
Yeah. So, to give you a sense of the architecture of this deep dive, we are going to be exploring 4 massive pillars of thought.
4 pillars. First up, we'll start with the ontological argument, which really forces us to examine the very nature and structure of the human mind.
That's the inward look.
Exactly. From there, we move outward to the cosmological argument, diving deep into the actual mechanics of cause and effect. Then we hit the third pillar, the teleological argument, which focuses on the grand, intricate design of the physical universe, from the microscopic all the way to the galactic.
Which is my favorite part, by the way.
It's mind-blowing. And then finally, we turn back inward for the moral or anthropological argument, analyzing the strange, unyielding realities of human nature and the conscience.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with that first pillar, the ontological argument. Hodge insists that before we even look at a tree or the stars or, a human eyeball, we have to look inward.
We have to start with the mind.
Right. We have to examine the nature of human thought itself and our ideas. And I have to be honest, as I was reading through this section of the notes, my brain started to hurt a little bit.
It's a heavy lift.
It is. It feels like a massive departure from how we normally process reality.
It is a radical departure, and that is actually by design. The ontological argument is what philosophers classify as an a priori argument. Now, in plain terms, that just means it is a metaphysical argument that does not rely on observing the outside world.
So no sensory input at all.
None. It doesn't proceed from seeing an effect like the house and guessing the cause the builder. Instead, it suggests that the real objective existence of God is actually woven into the very idea of such a being.
See, that feels totally counterintuitive to me. My baseline assumption is that ideas and reality are 2 totally separate buckets.
Right, the internal and the external.
Yeah. I mean, I can have an idea of a pastrami sandwich right now. I can imagine the rye bread, the mustard, the steam coming off the hot meat.
Making me hungry.
Right. But that doesn't mean a pastrami sandwich is miraculously sitting on the desk in front of me. Ideas don't just conjure physical reality. So how on earth does this argument claim otherwise? Let's look at Anselm, because he's the one who really framed this up historically. What was his angle?
Anselm's approach is structurally brilliant, even if it takes a minute to wrap your head around it. He essentially says this: that which exists in reality is inherently greater than that which exists only in the mind.
Okay, I track with that. A real sandwich is better than an imaginary sandwich.
Exactly. Now, apply that to the concept of God. Anselm defines God as that than which nothing greater can be conceived.
The ultimate being.
Right. We all possess this idea of an infinitely perfect being. But if actual existence is a perfection, and Anselm argues it is, because to actually exist is objectively greater than to merely be a concept, and if God does not actually exist, then we could theoretically conceive of a being greater than God.
Wait, let me slow that down and make sure I'm grasping the mechanics here.
Go for it.
If I am imagining this ultimate, flawless, perfect being, but he only exists inside my own imagination, then he isn't actually the greatest conceivable being. Because a being that exists in my mind and independently in the real world would be greater.
You're getting it.
So therefore, to even hold the concept of an infinitely perfect being in my mind without my brain completely short-circuiting, that being must actually exist. Otherwise, the very concept contradicts itself. Like a non-existent perfect being is just an oxymoron.
That is the core of it, yeah. Anselm regarded the negation of God's existence as a literal, logical impossibility. Because God is the highest truth, the highest being, the highest good. Necessity of existence is baked right into the DNA of the idea of absolute perfection.
It's inescapable.
Right. If you possess the idea of God, you are forced by the laws of logic to admit his actual existence. What is necessary is, by definition, actual.
Okay, now, Descartes took a swing at this too, a few centuries later. But reading the notes, it seemed like he came at it from a slightly different angle. He focused really heavily on our own limitations, right? Our smallness.
He did. Descartes starts with the undeniable fact that we are finite beings. We are limited, bounded, flawed, and imperfect.
Very true.
And because we are finite, and because we spend our entire lives only conversing with and observing finite things around us, the idea of the infinite could not have possibly originated within us.
Because you can't pour a gallon of water.
Yeah, out of a thimble. Exactly. You cannot get the infinite from the finite. So Descartes asks the obvious question, where did this necessary, pervasive idea of an infinitely perfect being come from?
If we couldn't invent it ourselves.
Right, and the trees and rocks certainly didn't teach it to us, so it must have been planted in our minds by God himself. This makes his existence a necessary assumption just to explain our own thoughts.
And Descartes uses this really famous analogy of a triangle.
Yeah.
He says that just as it is included in our very idea of a triangle, that its internal angles must equal 2 right angles, the existence of God is included in our very idea of him.
Yep. You cannot have a triangle without the specific angle properties. It literally ceases to be a triangle.
And in Descartes' view, you cannot have God without existence.
Precisely.
Okay, here's where I have to push back a little.
Yeah.
And frankly, I was really relieved to see that Charles Hodge pushes back in the text as well. This whole line of reasoning, it feels like a linguistic parlor trick.
A parlor trick.
Yeah. I mean, just because I can perfectly define a billionaire unicorn in my mind, I can tell you its horn is made of flawless diamond, its coat is spun gold, and its bank account is in the Cayman Islands.
Right.
That doesn't mean this billionaire unicorn is going to suddenly trot into my backyard.
Yeah, the unicorn problem.
Exactly. I can define something perfectly with absolute necessity in its traits, but that doesn't force it to materialize in objective reality.
I see where you're going, but let's reframe that slightly because the philosophers who champion this would totally tear that unicorn analogy apart.
Oh, would they?
Absolutely. A unicorn, even a billionaire one, is a contingent being. It doesn't have to exist. It's just an aggregation of finite parts. A horse, a horn, a bank account. What Anselm and Descartes are talking about is a being whose very essence is existence.
Okay, I see the distinction.
But to your credit, the unease you're feeling is exactly the critique formulated by Immanuel Kant, which Hodge heavily relies on in these notes, actually.
So Kant felt it was a parlor trick, too.
In a much more rigorously philosophical way, yes. Kant broke this down by distinguishing between what he called an analytic judgment and a synthetic judgment. And this is crucial for understanding why Hodge ultimately steps away from relying solely on the ontological argument.
Let's define those terms, because they sound a little intimidating, but I suspect the concept is fairly grounded.
It is. What's fascinating here is that an analytic judgment is essentially just unpacking what is already contained within a subject.
Like opening a box.
Exactly. It's like taking a suitcase you've already packed, opening it up, and listing what's inside. When you say a triangle has 3 sides and its angles equal 2 right angles, you aren't adding any new information to reality. You are just analyzing the definition of a triangle.
Because if you take away the angles, you take away the triangle.
Right. That is an analytic judgment.
So I'm just analyzing the concept itself. I'm not making a claim about the outside world. I'm just saying if a triangle exists, it inherently has these properties.
Right. But declaring that something actually exists in the real objective world is a synthetic judgment. There is a synthesis, a putting together of two distinct things. You are adding something to the concept that was not strictly contained in the mental definition.
You're adding the property of objective reality.
Exactly. So Anselm and Descartes were treating existence like it was just another item in the suitcase, like it was just a trait you could unpack alongside omniscience and omnipotence.
Oh, wow. I see.
They treated existence as an analytic property of perfection. But Kant and Hodge argue that you cannot simply deduce a synthetic reality from an analytic definition. We can infer from the idea of a perfect being that he is wise and good, that is analytic, but we cannot just automatically infer that he actually exists in objective reality, because reality is something added to the mere idea.
You can't bridge the gap from the mind to the universe using just definitions.
You really can't.
That makes a lot of sense. So if we accept Hodge's critique that you can't just define a perfect being into existence, does this whole ontological argument just get tossed in the bin? I mean, why even include it in the text if it's flawed?
Because it still reveals something staggering about human nature. The notes bring in other thinkers, like Dr. Samuel Clarke and Victor Cousin, who tweaked this a priori approach.
How so?
Well, Clarke argued that while we can conceive of the physical world not existing, we literally cannot conceive of the non-existence of space and duration. Try it. Try to imagine no space and no time.
My brain just hits a brick wall. I just imagine a black void, but a void is still space.
Yeah.
And I imagine that void lasting forever, which is still time.
Exactly. You can't escape it. Since space and duration are infinite and they aren't physical substances themselves, Clarke reasoned there must be an eternal and necessary substance of which they are the attributes.
Oh, okay.
And Cousin took it a step further, arguing that the idea of the infinite is a necessary correlative to the finite. Yeah. The moment your consciousness recognizes something as finite and imperfect, like yourself, or a tree, or a mountain reason, forces you to instantly conceive of the infinite and perfect. You cannot observe the finite without the mind instinctively generating the reality of the infinite.
It's like a shadow. You can't recognize a shadow without implicitly understanding that a light source must exist to cast it, even if you can't see the light directly.
That is a phenomenal way to put it. Yes. So what is the ultimate takeaway from this first pillar? Even if these arguments don't independently prove a personal God with airtight mathematical logic, they prove the human mind's inescapable hardwired need for an infinite reality.
We can't function without it.
We really can't. The mind cannot understand space, time, or its own limitations without continuously assuming and reaching for an eternal being. We are structurally built to require the infinite.
The mind is structurally built to require the infinite. That is heavy thought to carry. But if looking inward at our own minds leaves us wanting objective, undeniable proof of a personal God, we have to look outward.
We have to look at the stuff around us.
Right. What happens when we stop analyzing our definitions and start observing the actual physical universe? This shifts us directly into the second pillar, the cosmological argument, which is entirely grounded in the chain of cause and effect.
The cosmological argument rests on a syllogism that feels almost painfully obvious at first glance.
Lay it out for us.
First premise, every effect must have an adequate cause. Second premise, the world is an effect. Conclusion, therefore, the world must have had a cause outside of itself, adequate to account for its existence.
It sounds incredibly straightforward.
Yeah.
But obviously, there's a trapdoor here, because a lot of modern skeptics, and Hodge spends a lot of time addressing David Hume specifically, have a very different definition of cause and effect than classical thinkers do.
Oh, completely different.
So we have to define our terms carefully, or the whole argument just collapses. What exactly do we mean by a cause?
That is the absolute crux of the issue. According to the skeptical view championed by Hume and later adapted by thinkers like John Stuart Mill, all we can actually observe with our senses is a sequence of events.
Like a timeline.
Exactly. Event A happens, then event B happens. That is the absolute limit of human knowledge. So to Hume, a cause is nothing more than an invariable antecedent. It's just the thing that always happens immediately before the other thing happens.
Let me see if I can ground this. Say I have an old school alarm clock, and it goes off at 6 a.m. right before the sun rises.
Okay.
And let's say it has done this every single day without fail for my entire life.
Okay.
According to Hume's strict definition, my alarm clock is the invariable antecedent to the sunrise. But common sense screams at me that the alarm clock certainly doesn't possess the actual power to make the massive, fiery sun crest the horizon. Just because one precedes the other doesn't mean one powers the other.
Right. But Hume would say that because you cannot visibly see power or efficiency, you can't weigh it, you can't measure it or photograph it, you have no philosophical right to claim that power exists.
That's wild.
He says you just see the clock ring and then you see the sunrise. That's it. The common doctrine, however, which Hodge vehemently defends, says a cause isn't just a placeholder on a timeline. A true cause possesses three essential characteristics.
Okay, later.
First, it has real existence. It must be a substance because a non-entity cannot act.
Right. Nothing cannot do something.
Second, it has actual power or efficiency. There is something inherent in its nature that actually produces the effect. And third, that efficiency must be adequate and appropriate to the effect produced.
I can't use a feather to knock down a steel skyscraper. The cause has to have enough juice, so to speak, to account for the magnitude of the effect.
Exactly.
And Hodge points out that we actually know this intuitively from our own internal consciousness. We are causes. I decide to lift my hand right now. I possess the real existence, the internal power, and the adequate efficiency to lift it. I am not just an invariable antecedent to my hand moving. My will is the active cause. I experience that power directly.
And once we establish that true causes have real adequate power, we have to interrogate the second premise of the cosmological argument.
Which is, how do we actually know the world itself is an effect?
Right, because if the universe is just eternal, if it has always been here humming along, it doesn't need a cause.
Hodge gives us a brilliant conceptual tool here to visualize why an eternal, uncaused universe doesn't make logical sense. He talks about the concept of a chain of links.
Yes, the chain analogy.
If everything in the world is dependent and mutable, if everything was caused by something before it is, you have a chain of effects. Now, if a chain of 3 links cannot support itself in midair, a chain of 1,000,000 links cannot support itself either.
Still just hanging there.
Right. Simply adding more dependent links going backward infinitely doesn't magically generate a point of support. As Hodge famously puts it, nothing multiplied by infinity is nothing still.
It's a devastating critique of infinite regression. You cannot generate self-existence by stacking up an infinite number of dependent existences. The human mind logically demands a sufficient, uncaused cause at the very beginning of the chain.
And it's not just abstract armchair philosophy either. Hodge dives into the science of his day, historical and geological arguments to back this up.
He does. He points out that all historical evidence indicates mankind has existed for a relatively short period. Even if you stretch that timeline back millions of years using modern theories of development, 1,000,000 years is as insignificant as a single second when compared to eternity.
Mankind had a definite beginning.
Yes, and the geological argument reinforces this. The fossil record demonstrates that extant genera of plants and animals began to exist within specific time frames on this globe. There was a time when they were not, and then a time when they were.
And crucially, he notes that genera and species hold their fundamental structural forms. And science, even today, has no proof whatsoever of spontaneous generation. Life only comes from pre-existing life. Dead rocks don't suddenly erupt into living, breathing organisms on their own.
Exactly. So if mankind is historically young, if life doesn't spontaneously erupt from inorganic matter, and if species have distinct origins in time, then all these things began to be. And the fundamental rule is whatever begins to be is an effect. They were caused. Therefore, they demand a creator.
Which brings us back to Hume's radical skepticism. Because to avoid this overwhelming conclusion, Hume has to essentially blow up his own philosophy.
He really does.
He claimed we have no sensory impression of power, therefore power does not exist in reality. The efficacy of causes, Hume argued, is just a psychological habit in our minds, not a physical reality in the objects themselves. I feel like if we actually follow Hume's logic all the way down, we end up in a totally absurd place.
Right.
Where does his reasoning actually take us?
It takes us to complete chaos. If Hume is right, and there is absolutely no such thing as power or a necessary connection between cause and effect, then literally anything can produce anything. Anything. Creation, motion, reason, even a human volition or the universe itself could just pop out of nowhere from any object or from absolutely nothing. Because if there is no rule requiring an adequate cause with actual power, there are no rules at all. A pebble could cause a galaxy. Non-entity could produce reality.
That is terrifying. It completely dismantles the foundation of all science, all physics, all rational thought. If my alarm clock could theoretically cause a whale to drop out of the sky just because there's no inherent power required to link causes to effects, we aren't living in a universe of laws. We are living in a chaotic dreamscape.
And that is precisely why Hodge argues we must rely on the fundamental laws of belief that are impressed upon our nature.
We have to trust our baseline sanity.
We do. We are forced by our very constitution as rational beings to reject Hume's absurdity. We know from our own consciousness that power exists. We experience it every time we make a choice. So what does this all mean? We cannot genuinely force ourselves to believe that the universe, with all its staggering complexity, simply sprang out of absolutely nothing, without an adequate, powerful cause.
When you really sit down and try to force your mind to accept that the universe popped into existence uncaused, from a state of absolute nothingness, you realize the mental gymnastics required to believe that are far more strenuous than accepting a first cause.
Oh, absolutely.
But establishing that a first cause must exist and that it must have adequate power only gets us halfway there. Now we had to ask the critical question, what kind of cause is it? Is this first cause just a blind, swirling physical force, like a cosmic wind, or is it an intelligent architect?
Which brings us to the third massive pillar.
Right, the teleological argument, the argument from grand design.
The syllogism here is perhaps the most famous in all of theology. Design implies a designer. The world everywhere exhibits marks of design. Therefore, the world owes its existence to an intelligent author.
And we need to be clear about what we mean by design, because it's not just about things looking pretty or symmetrical.
No, not at all.
Design, in this context, has a very rigorous definition. It involves the selection of an end to be attained, the choice of suitable means to achieve that end, and the actual practical application of those means, all of which inherently require a mind to conceive the end, a will to choose the means, and power to execute them.
And here we encounter a vital concept from the text that we can call the blueprint principle. It's a subtle but profound point. The intelligence indicated by a design is not located in the thing itself.
Break that down for me. What do you mean the intelligence isn't in the thing?
Think of a brilliantly written novel. The mind, the intelligence that conceived the plot, arranged the chapters, and chose the vocabulary is not physically located inside the paper and ink.
Right. The book doesn't know it's a book.
Exactly. The ink doesn't know it's forming a story. The intelligence resides entirely in the author. Or if you look at a complex mechanical watch, the intelligence isn't in the brass gears or the springs. They're just pieces of metal. The intelligence is in the inventor who shaped them.
Okay, I'm tracking.
In the exact same way, the mind indicated in the structure of a plant, an animal, or the human body is not located within those physical tissues. A piece of bone doesn't know it needs to act as a lever. The intelligence must be external to the organism.
I love that we can dive into the specific biological examples from the text to illustrate this, because reading Hodge's descriptions of human anatomy is staggering. He wasn't just a theologian. He was looking deeply into the science of his time.
He was fascinated by it.
Let's talk about the human eye.
The eye is a masterpiece that defies any explanation relying on blind chance. It is an optical instrument constructed in perfect accordance with the hidden, highly complex laws of light. You have the retina, which is the only nerve in the entire human body susceptible to light impressions.
Right.
You have the pupil, an orifice that automatically dilates and contracts based on the intensity of light without any conscious effort from our will.
And the detail that absolutely floored me in the text was about the inner chamber of the eye. Hodge points out that if the inner chamber of the eye were white, or any reflective color, it would bounce rays of light around at every possible angle and make clear vision completely impossible. It would just be a blinding glare.
It would be useless.
So out of all the possible colors and tissues, that specific chamber, and that chamber alone, is lined with a highly specialized black pigment designed specifically to absorb the scattered light.
And here's the fact that elevates it from a biological wonder to philosophical proof. This entire perfectly tuned optical instrument is fashioned in the pitch black, total darkness of the mother's womb.
It's incredible.
It is meticulously built for a medium light that the organism has never experienced, has no physical knowledge of, and has absolutely no current use for.
That is just wild to think about. Blind physical forces react to their immediate environment.
Yeah.
But the eye is built in total defiance of its immediate environment, preparing for an entirely different world.
The same applies to the ear.
Let's hear it.
The ear is just as complex. You have a tortuous, bony passage carved into the skull, a delicate tympanic membrane designed precisely to receive air vibrations, and tiny, intricate bones that act as mechanical levers to transmit those specific acoustic vibrations to the auditory nerve.
All built in silence.
Built in total silence. This organ is constructed according to the most recondite, deeply hidden principles of acoustics, allowing us to eventually experience the marvels of speech, warning sounds, and music.
And don't even get me started on the digestive system.
Oh, the digestion section is great.
Reading through Hodge's notes on digestion is like walking through a highly advanced automated chemical sorting plant. The body anticipates the food before it even arrives in the stomach. You have teeth perfectly shaped and embedded for mastication. You have salivary glands that produce exactly the right chemical fluid to begin breaking down starches.
And then it travels down to the stomach, which manufactures a highly specific, powerful acid found nowhere else in the body, capable of dissolving the food without dissolving the stomach itself.
Yes. And then the absorbent vessels take over, acting like intelligent logistics machines. They select the valuable nutritional elements, pour them into the bloodstream, and route them to their predestined locations across the entire body.
It's perfectly orchestrated.
Carbon is specifically sent to the lungs to be consumed for vital heat. Lime is routed exclusively to the skeletal system to reinforce the bones. Fibrin goes directly to the muscles, and phosphorus is sent upward to fuel the brain and nervous system. It is a symphony of automated logistics.
And all of this biological wonder, the eye, the ear, digestion, culminates in what Hodge presents as perhaps the most mind-bending proof of external intelligence.
Which is?
Prevision. Prevision is simply the act of preparing for a future event.
This is where it gets incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for skeptics to argue for blind physical forces, right?
Exactly. Because blind physical forces, by definition, react to what is happening now. A rock rolling down a hill reacts to gravity in the present moment. It cannot plan for the valley it will hit tomorrow.
It has no foresight.
Right. But the natural world is utterly saturated with prevision. The infant in the womb forms lungs months before it has ever encountered a single molecule of air. The mammalian mother begins altering her own chemistry to secrete milk, a fluid perfectly formulated for the specific nutritional needs of an offspring she has not yet met, before birth even occurs.
The text mentions the egg, too, which is such a simple, everyday object, but profound when you think about it.
It really is.
The egg contains the yolk, which is perfectly sized and chemically formulated to nourish the germ cell during its isolation, anticipating exactly how many days of food it will need before it hatches and can feed itself. I picture this like a flawlessly programmed smart home system.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Imagine you are flying home from a 2-week vacation in the middle of winter. Before your plane even lands, the smart home system registers your flight path. It turns on the heat to exactly 72 degrees. It signals the delivery service to stock the fridge with your usual groceries, and it dims the lights in the bedroom, all anticipating your future arrival and your future needs. We would never say the house did that blindly. We would know a programmer set that up. Blind nature cannot plan ahead like a smart home. It requires an external intelligence that knows what is coming and prepares the physical environment for it.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize it. Prevision demands a mind that lives outside the immediate flow of physical time. But the teleological argument doesn't just look at the microscopic or the anatomical. It scales up to cosmic and environmental design. Hodge points out that there is a staggering unity and mutual relation in all parts of the Earth's systems.
Let's talk about the Earth's anomalies, because the section on the physics of water absolutely blew my mind.
It's so cool.
The text points out a general, almost universal law of physics. Physical bodies contract, become denser, and become heavier when they get cold. We see it with metals, we see it with gases. But water is this miraculous life-saving exception.
It is. When water cools, it contracts like everything else until it hits about 39 degrees Fahrenheit. But then, as it approaches freezing, it suddenly reverses course.
It breaks the rule.
Exactly. It expands and becomes lighter, which is why ice floats on top of liquid water.
And if that benevolent exception to the general law of physics did not exist, the consequences would be apocalyptic. The ice would sink. Over a few winters, our rivers, lakes, and eventually the oceans would freeze solid from the bottom up.
They'd become blocks of ice.
They would never thaw. It would destroy all aquatic life, disrupt the water cycle, and render the greater part of the temperate zones completely uninhabitable for humans.
It's a localized suspension of a fundamental physical rule, seemingly designed specifically to preserve life. And Hodge points to geographical designs as well, like the Isthmus of Darien, that narrow strip of land connecting North and South America.
Right, Panama.
Yeah. We usually just look at it as a piece of geography. But without that exact, specific physical barrier, the immense body of warm water in the equatorial Atlantic would just flow straight westward into the Pacific Ocean.
But because that land bridge blocks it, that massive current of warm water is forced to deflect. It turns and floats in a northeasterly direction across the Atlantic, what we know as the Gulf Stream.
Exactly.
And that specific current of warm water is what gives Great Britain and northwestern Europe their moderate, habitable temperatures. Without that one specific strip of land thousands of miles away, Europe would be an uninhabitable frozen wasteland. The global system is completely interlocked.
And we can scale up even further to the cosmos itself. The facts of our solar system are profoundly well-ordered. We have massive planets revolving around the sun, all moving in the exact same direction, in nearly circular orbits, in nearly the same plane. The centrifugal forces pushing them out and the centripetal gravitational forces pulling them in are exactly precariously balanced, so we don't fly off into the dark, freezing void of space or crash into the fiery surface of the sun.
And the sheer scale of the universe they were beginning to understand when Hodge was writing is humbling. The text mentions Sirius, a star calculated even then to shine with a light equal to 250 of our suns, and Alcyone emitting the light of 12,000 suns.
It's unimaginable.
We're talking about billions of miles of space. And yet throughout this vast, almost incomprehensible universe, absolute order reigns. The exact same laws of gravitation, light, and heat apply here on Earth as they do near Sirius. Confusion and chaos are the mathematical result of chance. Universal order is the sure indication of mind.
When you look at that scale from the microscopic lining of the retina to the orbit of stars 12,000 times larger than our sun, you have to ask what kind of mind, what wisdom, what power, and what beneficence is on display here. It is genuinely overwhelming to contemplate.
It is overwhelming. But to be truly well-informed, we cannot just marvel at the beauty. We have to look at the pushbacks. If this evidence is so overwhelming, how do skeptics respond? We need to understand the counter-arguments regarding chance, useless organs, and blind instincts to see if the teleological argument really holds up.
We should start with the heavy hitters of philosophy, Hume and Kant. Hume's primary objection to the design argument is based on his strict empiricism. He argues that we haven't actually seen a world being made.
Right.
We see humans make ships, houses, and watches, so when we see a house, we can safely infer a human designer. But the universe is a singular, unique object. Since we don't have personal experience observing universes being constructed in a cosmic workshop somewhere, we have no philosophical right to infer a universe maker.
Which honestly seems to miss the entire point of the argument. The argument isn't based on our empirical experience of watching worlds being built. It's based on the intuitive nature of design itself. If I land on a deserted alien planet and find a beautifully functioning mechanical clock, I don't need to have seen the alien build it to know it was designed.
Precisely the counter-argument Hodge uses. Experience teaches us that design implies intelligence, but our limited experience is not the boundary of that conviction. It is a self-evident universal truth that you cannot extract complex, harmonious adaptation of means to ends from blind chance.
What about Kant? What was his issue?
Kant accepted that there was design, but he argued that the evidences of design only prove a world builder, an architect who takes pre-existing materials and shapes them. He argued it does not prove an infinite God who created the materials from nothing. He also argued that a finite world, no matter how big, cannot prove an absolutely infinite cause.
So how does Hodge dismantle Kant's limitation?
Very effectively, by combining the arguments. He points out that the sheer immensity of the universe, with its intricate design stretching across billions of miles, requires a cause that is incomprehensibly great in wisdom and power, and for all practical purposes of human understanding, an incomprehensibly great cause is equivalent to an infinite one.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, Kant's objection ignores the cosmological argument we discussed earlier. The cosmological argument already proved that God is not just a molder of pre-existing matter, but the creator of the matter itself, which inherently requires infinite power.
Okay, let's move from the grand philosophical objections down to a much more granular biological objection. The useless organs pushback.
Yes.
Skeptics, including some very prominent anatomists, point out physical anomalies in nature. They say, look at whales. They possess teeth in their embryonic state that never fully develop and are never used. Look at certain birds or crocodiles. They have separate bones in their craniums, just like mammals, but it serves absolutely no biological purpose for an animal hatching from an egg.
Right, the leftover parts.
Yeah. They argue that if an infinitely intelligent, perfectly utilitarian God designed everything, we shouldn't see these useless leftover parts. Doesn't this prove a lack of design, or at least a flawed designer?
This objection forces Hodge to introduce what I consider one of the most brilliant and memorable analogies in the entire text. We can call it the spurious dime analogy.
I love this one.
It's so good. I want you to imagine a prince who is known to be incredibly benevolent. One day, he gifts you a massive, ornate chest filled with millions of dollars in pristine gold coins and flawless, priceless jewels. You are marveling at this gift, sorting through the unimaginable wealth, but down at the very bottom of the chest, you find one single, fake, spurious dime.
Okay, I follow.
Now, you look at that fake dime, and you cannot explain why it is there. It doesn't seem to fit the pattern of the rest of the treasure. But would it be rational for you to suddenly reject the prince's benevolent intent? Would you point to that one piece of cheap metal and say, aha, this one fake dime proves the millions in gold and jewels were just a random accident of chance?
Obviously not.
Or think of it musically. Imagine listening to a masterful, hours-long symphony composed by a genius. If you hear a single dissonant chord that you, with your limited musical knowledge, cannot immediately account for, you don't leap out of your seat and declare the entire symphony a product of random noise.
That is such a powerful way to frame it. The skeptic's objection is actually just an argument from our own ignorance.
Exactly.
Just because we, with our limited scientific understanding, can't immediately see the utilitarian purpose of a whale's undeveloped teeth doesn't mean no reason exists in the mind of the designer. Ignorance of one small detail does not negate the overwhelming mountainous evidence of the whole.
And Hodge takes it a step further. He points out that the skeptics are assuming that strict, immediate physical utility is the only goal of a designer. But why should we assume that?
Right. Think of human architecture. When we build a grand cathedral or a monument, we don't just build for pure, stark utility. We don't just build a concrete box to keep the rain out. We build for symmetry, for aesthetic unity, for beauty. We add columns and gargoyles that don't hold up the roof.
And in the biological world, Hodge argues these supposedly useless features actually point to a higher aesthetic unity.
How so?
Scientists have long noted that the entire animal kingdom seems to be constructed around a few typical foundational forms. The presence of these characteristic features across completely different species, even when not strictly needed for an individual animal's survival, serves to indicate the grand, overarching unity of the plan on which the whole animal kingdom is constructed. It is not a flaw of utility. It is the signature of the artist.
Wow. The signature of the artist. That completely flips the objection on its head. Instead of a biological mistake, it's a stylistic hallmark tying the whole canvas together.
It's a beautiful way to look at it.
Okay, let's tackle the last major pushback, the instinct debate. Skeptics look at a bee building a mathematically perfect hexagonal honeycomb, or a spider spinning an incredibly complex geometric web, and they say, that's not intelligent design on the part of a creator. That is just a blind impulse, a biological instinct that mimics design. The bee doesn't know geometry, it's just a biological machine acting on an urge.
First, Hodge clarifies what instinct actually is, pushing back against the idea that it is totally blind. He argues it is actually intelligent, but strictly within its specific narrow limits.
Give me an example.
A beaver, for example, doesn't just build the exact same dam blindly everywhere it goes, regardless of the environment. It adapts its construction to the specific current, depth, and geography of the stream it is currently in. That requires a localized, real-time intelligence.
I didn't know that about beavers.
Yeah.
But the bigger point Hodge makes isn't about the animal's brain. It's about the pairing of the biological instinct with the external materials, right?
Yes, and this is where the skeptic's argument completely breaks down. Even if you grant the skeptic their premise that the bee's impulse is somewhat blind, they still have to account for the pairing of the internal instinct with external nature.
Meaning the wax.
Right. The bee's body is designed to secrete a very specific type of wax, and its internal instinct drives it to form that wax into the most structurally efficient, space-saving geometric shape possible, the hexagon. The spider produces a highly specific, viscid, sticky matter, and its instincts tells it exactly how to weave it across specific anchor points to catch prey.
They are two totally separate systems.
Exactly. The internal instinct cannot account for the external physical organ producing the wax or the silk, and the physical organ cannot account for the complex behavioral instinct. They are two distinct, separate things that are perfectly seamlessly coordinated.
which implies
That coordination absolutely demands an external, overarching intelligence that understood both the biology and the physical environment and programmed them to work together. Blind chance cannot synchronize two separate systems so perfectly.
we have covered so much ground. We've explored the structural necessities of the human mind. We've traced the unbreakable chain of cause and effect back to its origin. We've marveled at the staggering biological and cosmic architecture of the physical universe, and we've dismantled the skeptics' pushbacks.
It's a lot to take in.
It is, but here's where it gets really interesting. We arrive at the fourth and final pillar of our deep dive. We shift from the external world to the invisible world. We move into the anthropological or moral argument. We are looking at the human soul.
This is a profound shift in the text. Hodge uses a beautiful, evocative image here, just as a smooth, tranquil lake reflects the sun, revealing that the sun exists and giving us a sense of its dazzling brightness. The human soul reflects God.
I love that imagery.
Now, it doesn't reveal everything about God just as a reflection on a lake, doesn't show you the complex internal nuclear fusion happening inside the star, but what the reflection does reveal is trustworthy, accurate, and true.
But before we can talk about the soul reflecting a divine creator, we have to establish that the soul is actually a distinct thing, distinct from the physical gray matter of the brain.
Right, the mind-body problem.
Exactly. Because materialists, both in Hodge's time and very loudly today, argue that the mind is nothing more than a byproduct of physical matter. The text quotes a famous materialist motto from a German philosopher, ohne Phosphor kein Gedanke, which translates to, without phosphorus, no thought. They argue that if you just arrange the right chemicals in the right complex patterns, consciousness just magically pops out as a byproduct.
Hodge completely, categorically rejects this materialist view, and he does so by pointing to what he calls the impassable gulfs in nature.
Impassable gulfs?
Yes. As a matter of universal scientific experience, physical forces alone, like rocks, water, and heat, never ever spontaneously generate vegetable life. And vegetable life, no matter how complex the plant, never spontaneously originates conscious animal life. And animal life, no matter how advanced, never crosses the final gulf to become intellectual, spiritual, moral mind.
So it's a hierarchy of being. And you can't jump levels without an outside force.
Precisely. There are distinct, unbridgeable categories of existence here. You cannot logically say that high-level intelligence is merely the product of what is completely unintelligent. A fundamental rule of logic is that the effect cannot contain more than what was in its cause. If there is mind in the effectus, there must be mind in the cause.
So, if the mind cannot be produced by dead matter, it must owe its existence to the Father of Spirits. And this leads us to one of the most poignant and fascinating concepts in the entire text, the law of met capacities.
The law of met capacities is a general fact that characterizes absolutely all the works of nature we can observe. The law is simply this: whatever capacities, necessities, or desires are found intimately woven into the nature of any organism, adequate provision is always made in the external world to meet and satisfy them.
I think we need to flesh this out with some examples because it's a beautiful way to look at ecology.
Think of the vegetable world. Plants have a biological necessity for carbon, so the atmosphere is provided rich with it. They have a capacity to be affected by and draw energy from light, so the sun is provided.
Okay.
Move to the animal world. If an animal is born with the appetite of hunger, there is food in the environment suited to its specific digestive system. If it is born with eyes, there is light. If it has lungs, there is air. Everything in the natural world reaches its perfection and fully accomplishes the end of its physical being. All its natural capacities are exercised, and all its normal wants are satisfied by its environment.
Which brings us to the human exception. In reading this part of the text, I found it simultaneously tragic and incredibly beautiful. Man is the single glaring exception to this universal law of nature.
We really are.
Our physical bodies are satisfied here. We have food, water, air, shelter. But our souls are not. We have an infinite capacity for knowledge, a relentless curiosity that is never fully reached in this short lifetime. We have a deep, agonizing desire for total, unblemished happiness and peace that this broken world simply cannot fill. We have profound spiritual aspirations, a longing for fellowship with something eternal that no physical experience on earth can satisfy.
We are strangers in our own home.
Exactly. I picture it like this. Imagine a team of marine biologists discovering a new, bizarre, deep-sea creature living at the very bottom of the Marianas Trench in pitch-black, freezing water.
Okay, I can picture that.
And as they examine it, they discover this creature has highly advanced, incredibly sensitive optical eyes. Now, the biologists wouldn't look at those complex eyes and say, oh, what a random, completely useless biological mutation.
No, they wouldn't.
They would say the very existence of these eyes proves that there must be a light source somewhere else in its life cycle, or somewhere else it belongs to. The very existence of the eyes demands the existence of light. In the exact same way, the infinite, unquenchable hunger of the human soul proves the existence of an infinite being meant to satisfy it.
That is a staggering analogy, and it perfectly captures Hodge's point. Just as certainly as hunger in the animal supposes that there is food adapted to still its cravings, so certainly does this deep existential hunger of the human soul suppose that there is some being in the universe capable of satisfying its necessities. God is the correlative of man, we are a lock, and he is the only key that fits.
But the moral argument doesn't end with just desires and happiness. There's a harder, sharper, more absolute edge to the human soul, which is the conscience.
Yes, our moral nature. By the very constitution of our nature, every human being has an immediate perception of right and wrong. And Hodge is very careful to point out that this moral perception is entirely distinct from what is merely agreeable or profitable or expedient. It is a simple, primary, irreducible idea of moral obligation, the concept of ought.
And the text stresses the independence of this moral judgment from our own desires. I cannot force my will to believe that malignity or torturing an innocent person for fun is a virtue. Even if I try to argue myself into it, even if society tells me it's okay, my conscience revolts. The conscience is independent of my desires.
It is more than independent. It has lordship over us.
Lordship, that's a strong word.
It possesses authority. We can try to ignore it, we can sear it, we can drown it out with distractions, but we cannot emancipate ourselves from it. It commands, and it forbids. And most importantly, it enforces its decisions. Its rewards are a profound, quiet peace, and its punishments are the most intolerable, crushing agony the human soul can endure, the agony of guilt and remorse.
So, if we take a step back and look at the whole board, what does the universal existence of this authoritative conscience actually prove? Why is it the final pillar?
If we connect to the bigger picture, this inherent sense of responsibility involves the undeniable idea of a law, a moral rule we are bound to conform to. But a law intrinsically requires a lawgiver. Our feeling of responsibility is not just a vague feeling of owing a debt to an abstract concept of society or to the universe at large.
It's more personal than that.
Exactly. When we feel deep moral guilt, we are feeling responsible to a person. We are accountable to a being who intimately knows what we do, who perfectly approves the right, and who has the sovereign power and purpose to reward or punish. The very existence of our moral nature, our inescapable conscience, forces us to assume the existence of a moral, personal God.
And that ties this entire massive framework together perfectly. We have been on an absolute epic journey today through these notes on classical theology. We started by looking inward with the ontological argument, exploring how the human mind structurally requires the concept of a necessary, perfect being just to make sense of its own limitations.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We moved outward to the cosmological argument, tracing the unbreakable logical chain of cause and effect back to an adequate, powerful first cause, rejecting the chaotic absurdity of a universe that just pops into existence from nothing.
And then we explored the teleological argument, marveling at the staggering prevision of the human eye forming in the dark, the automated chemical plant of digestion, and the finely tuned gravitational dance of our solar system, all pointing undeniably to an intelligent designer who uses brilliant means to achieve complex ends.
Right. And finally, we looked back inward to the anthropological argument, discovering that our unquenchable spiritual thirst and the inescapable authoritative lordship of our moral conscience demand a personal, moral creator.
This has been one of the most rewarding dives we've taken. And it's a reminder that engaging with classical philosophy isn't just an academic exercise meant for dusty libraries. It provides a comprehensive, rigorously logical framework to understand your origin, the intricacies of your daily physical existence, and your ultimate responsibility in a universe that is definitively, demonstrably not random.
It anchors the hind. It demonstrates that the belief in a personal creator is not a blind leap into the dark, but a rational step into the light of overwhelming interlocking evidence, stretching from the microscopic structures of our own bodies to the very laws of human thought.
Beautifully said.
I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you go about your week. Building on the profound concepts we've just explored, we've spent a lot of time on the law of met capacities, that undeniable biological reality that throughout all of nature, every creature fully accomplishes the end of its being and every natural hunger has a corresponding food provided in the environment.
The universal rule.
Right. But we also saw that humanity is the sole, glaring exception in this physical world. Our souls remain hungry for a perfect justice and a perfect unblemished happiness we never fully grasp here on earth. So if the fundamental laws of the universe guarantee that every hunger has a corresponding food, and our deepest, most inescapable hunger is for perfection and a fellowship we never fully experience in this life, what does that inescapable hollow ache tell you about the reality of a world yet to come? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep looking for the builder's signature in everything around you.